The college football public and a vast majority of college football analysts are analyzing this Oregon Penn State matchup incorrectly. I don't like it. I think that a lot of the talking points are misguided at best, and a good portion of them are intellectually dishonest, very myopic, and rely heavily on something that I love to call recency bias or box score watching or using film on a play here, a play there, or one specific player, mostly quarterback, to draw conclusions about the whole team with not much more context included. So I want to explain to you my issues with a lot of the predictions I see out there. I want to issue some warnings, and I also want to ask you a question or two to answer in the comments section to get your feedback on my talking points and also really pick your brain a little bit. I love it when you guys pick my brain, so I thought I'd do you a favor and try to pick your brain if you so want to. If not, that's totally up to you. But before we get into that, I just want to say that I think, as of right here, right now, these are the two best teams in college football. Doesn't mean I believe they will be at the end of the year or I project them to be at the end of the year. Just right here, right now, I think that these are the top two teams in college football, and no one but one of these teams would be favored over the other. I think this is going to be a matchup that is physical, a matchup of several future NFL players, a matchup of, honestly, who I would call two titans of the 2025 season. Oregon, I think, is going to be a titan in college football moving forward with how they recruit and develop and the head coach and staff they have. And while Penn State doesn't recruit quite as well, if they can hold on to one of Knowles or Kotelnicki, but especially Knowles, and they continue to build the culture up from where they've started under Franklin and seeing how they've progressed over the years, and if Franklin can break through that glass ceiling, there's a chance that Penn State can be a titan in college football moving forward as well. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for these teams, and I think that this is going to be a game of the century power ratings wise this weekend. I would pick both of these teams right now to beat both Georgia and Alabama, potentially convincingly. But we're not talking about Alabama, Georgia here. I just wanted to set that aside. I think that these are the two best teams right here, right now in America. And that leads me to my question to pick your brain. Who is more impressive? Not who's been putting up better numbers. Not who preseason was number one. Not who is more talented. Not who has the better coordinators. Not any of that. I want to know, solely based on the games they've played, factoring in some of those other things I talked about. So combining a lot of those questions into one through the lens of how these games have been played. Who is truly more impressive? I know that Oregon has put up better numbers. I can share some of those with you right now. Oregon has a points per play margin of 0.595 to Penn State's 0.494. Oregon is first in that category. Penn State is fourth. When you look at net statistics and adjusted EPA per play from GameOnPaper.com, Oregon is first with a plus 0.53 adjusted EPA per play. Penn State is seventh with a plus 0.39 adjusted EPA per play. Numerically, Oregon, of course, is more impressive. Efficiency-wise, power ratings-wise, they are almost unanimously ranked number one and better than Penn State by default. But I'm not talking about who is more impressive in the box score or efficiency numbers or a lot of these analytics, which are quite useful, and I've used them here with you, and I often use them to, get judgment and to inform my picks, but they're not the final say, at least not always. And I want to challenge the notion that Oregon is the better team here. My challenge is, preseason-wise and coordinator duo-wise, Penn State was viewed as unanimously better, with the better roster, the more seasoned roster, the more experienced roster, with more first-round NFL draft picks, at least that are eligible to be picked in this coming NFL draft, and that Jim Knowles, even now, is still viewed as much better than Tosh Lupoy. Meanwhile, Andy Kotelnicki and Will Stein is more of a debate. So by default, coordinator goes to Penn State. We've only played through 4 weeks. The toughest team each has played is Northwestern. After that, it could be Montana State or FIU. Oregon State is awful. They are a shell of who they are. Oklahoma State just fired their coach and got humiliated by Tulsa. The game should not have been that close. So who's more impressive between these two teams? Oregon's clearly playing harder. They clearly have the more efficient passing attack. But I feel as if a lot of that is surface level stuff. And I think that in order to truly have that deeper under the hood look, we will have to watch this game and see how it plays out. I challenge you to think that maybe Penn State, and I think that watching these teams backs this up, just isn't trying as hard right now. You know, Oregon came out against Oklahoma State, and they even said it in the press conference. They were mad because they felt as if their head coach was attacked. They were trying to ace and humiliate Oklahoma State there. Penn State has had no such game. Nevada, FIU, Villanova, they come out, they look sluggish. Not going to say quite lazy, but they look sluggish, uninterested. They, outside of the 2-minute warning, really just want to milk the clock and get out of there. Drew Aller's only had 1 designed run. He's only had an average of 3 20-plus downfield passing attempts per game. By 20-plus, I mean 20-plus yards. They're playing vanilla. They're playing bored. And that Oklahoma State game, which informed a ton of the metrics for Oregon, and a lot of people look at as the game that shows Oregon's that good, that was a game where Oregon probably played their A game there. They came out and they tried hard because they wanted to send a message. What if their actual more average performance is what they showed against Northwestern or even parts of Oregon State? And what if Penn State hasn't showed their A-level game or even a B-level game yet? Final thing I'll leave you with in regards to that question is the guy who benches 225 for 20 reps but has 10 or 20 more in the tank and he doesn't break a sweat, his performance is more impressive than the guy who sweats while benching 5 more reps of 225. Because yes, the first guy, he only benched 225 for 20 times, 5 fewer times than the second guy, but he did it without trying. And the guy who tried so much harder than him, only for a fraction of the returns, is not more impressive. He just tried harder. And I think there's a real chance that people are looking into the interest level of these teams and directly correlating that with how good they actually are. And this is where I want to get into more of my points and not a question that I asked you guys with some interesting, strange, maybe overthought, maybe misguided, but context nonetheless. The 2024 matchup. How many people have you heard talk about this game from last year? Let me know. I guess that's question number 3, or maybe it's number 2. And also, it's kind of a footnote to that, how many people have you heard say that Oregon is going to win by the same amount or more than they did last year? Let me know. I haven't heard that's not the majority. I don't think the majority is saying that Oregon is going to blow Penn State out. Most Oregon fans I've interacted with think it's going to be a close game. It's the same thing with Penn State fans. I think this is a lot more analysts or people with voices who are making these proclamations. I mean, even myself included. I have Penn State winning by 10. I'm not picking it to be a blowout. I'm closer to picking it to be a close game than a blowout. But I'm picking for Penn State to clearly show themselves as the better team, even if it's just by a razor-thin margin at the end. Why has no one mentioned that, not just in theory, but even in practice, like with tangible evidence, Penn State has minimized a lot of the things that hurt them against Oregon last year, and Oregon has not minimized what hurt them last year in this matchup. I'm not just talking about in theory. Most of this is theory so far. because they've played nobody. But Jim Knowles is no doubt better than Tom Allen. We know this. Penn State fans were right on one thing. If they were, it was that Allen was a bad fit for them last year. In big games, he was a 0. And at Clemson so far, he has been a 0. Knowles is not, indeed, he is not a 0. He isn't. He's had some struggles in big games, yes, but nowhere near to the level that Tom Allen or Tosh Lupoy have. He just has not. And if you want to debate me on that, well, we could take it to the comment section. I don't have the time for that. What I honestly think is nonsense. Knowles is the nation's best CC. Tom Allen is, at this point, a bottom half power 4 defensive coordinator. Just is. So Penn State definitively upgraded there. By returning the production they have and knowing that a lot of it was NFL production and talented players. Don't know why I was tripping over myself there. And also knowing that, yes, the books get things wrong, but they get very few things wrong. So the idea that Penn State is worse than they are last year or just the same team is more likely to be incorrect than correct. The books have already busted on Clemson. They got Florida State totally wrong. There is a chance that they busted on LSU. It looks like Notre Dame, honestly. A lot of people, including the books, were a little bit too high on. How likely is it that they're now going to be completely busted here and that Penn State is worse than they are last year, despite returning what they did at key positions? Name me one Penn State player who is bad returning production. You can't. You cannot name a current Penn State starter who was bad returning production. You can't. Maybe Drew Aller. But we'll get into this a little bit later. I think that Aller's metrics are deceivingly bad. Deceivingly bad. So Penn State improves at, I would say, defense overall due to the DC upgrade. Yes, they lose Abdul Carter, but Jazz Coleman looks like he's really good. Denai Dennis Sutton is probably a better run-stopping D-end. They are better at D-tackle. They reloaded through the portal and returning players at linebacker. And corner, with A.J. Harris coming back, I think is better. Special teams, we'll see. Early returns say it's better, but again, these teams haven't really played anyone, so I want to hold off on that. Offensively, Penn State returns 4 out of 5 offensive linemen from last year. They return both of their running backs and their quarterback, who against Oregon last year actually ran for over 50 yards and a touchdown, and had a few designed runs and pulls on zone reads. You'll see that in this game for sure, even though Penn State has not shown all but one designed run in its first 3 games. So Penn State still should be able to run the football really well. In fact, they should be able to run it better than they did last year against Oregon, because Oregon lost 2 NFL defensive tackles, and the current D tackles do not grade out as highly as Derek Harmon or Jamari Caldwell last year. They just do not. You look at Penn State, receiver was a weakness. What did they do in the portal? They got better receivers. Now, are they amazing? I don't know about that. I don't. But are they better than last year? Yeah. Just look at how they played at prior schools. Look at their talent level, their size, their athleticism. They have better wide receivers. They dropped off at tight end, though. For Oregon, much like Penn State at receiver, they've improved athletically at defensive back. But they've dropped off at an area last year that did not help them run defense, in terms at least of their defensive tackles. And their wide receiver core and their pass blocking, which were a huge part of the reason they were able to carve up Penn State's defense last year, along with the DC that Penn State then had, they've gotten worse there. Wide receiver 1, I think, is more athletic in Brycen Moore versus Tez Johnson last year. But last year you had Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, and you had Evan Stewart. This year you have Brycen Moore, Malik Benson, and Jeremiah McClellan or Kyler Casper. Last year's core was a stronger starting 3 than this year's. Definitely was. Jordan James, I think, would be the best running back on this team. And Penn State's defensive ends and their defensive line and defensive front with the new DC should be better utilized. And you look at Oregon's tackles, and their tackles right now, they do not grade out as well in pass blocking as Connerly and Cornelius did last year. They don't. And look, as Dante Moore is more talented than Dylan Gabriel, and there's no debating that, Gabriel was a veteran. Moore has never played in Beaver Stadium before. He's never made this long trip out east before. Never as a starter for Oregon. And the last time he played in a hostile environment against a ridiculously good defense was against Utah in 2023. Not saying he's that guy, but if people are going to say Moore is already one of the nation's best QBs and a Heisman, I get to say that in big games, he's been a zero. Both are valid. So many points in this game are valid. Why? Because they haven't played anyone yet. Neither of these teams has played anyone yet. But I think something that cannot be disputed here is that Penn State, if they're going to lose, is not going to lose in the same fashion they did last year. They're going to play Oregon almost guaranteed closer this year than they did last year. Why is that? Because they should still be able to exploit Oregon's D-line and defense the way they did last year. Better receivers, better offensive line, better running backs, better almost everything offensively. And Oregon's worse at D-tackle. And you look at Penn State's defense versus Oregon's offense, and Penn State should be able to do a better job in pass rush. Penn State's secondary is likely better, and Oregon just does not have the same amount of threatening options, threatening receivers, as they did last year. Penn State might be able to bracket Moore if he really is a problem, or Sadiq in this game, and the other options still may not be able to do all that much because of the drop-off in Oregon's depth at wide receiver. I think there's more evidence to that than a lot of other analysis that I've heard this week. The matchup last year that kept Penn State in the game despite a ton of mistakes more heavily favors the Lions this year than it did last year. And that's not even factoring in home field advantage. A few final things. In theory, preseason reshirts and priors still matters a ton here. And they matter because, again, these teams haven't played all that much of competent opponents. They just haven't. Penn State theoretically, in fact, not theoretically, they've definitely upgraded its staff, given the addition of Knowles. Penn State's defense is much better coached than it was last year. For Oregon, their staff's about the same. Quarterback, Oregon's is upgraded. I agree with that, or at least for now I do. Maybe after this game I'll think differently, but for now, yes. In theory, in practice not yet, but in theory, Aller should upgrade too. He made progress from 22 to 23, from 23 to 24, from 24 to 25. The trend should be he makes progress, and he's in a second year with what everyone can admit is at least a good offensive coordinator. Not perfect, but he's at least good. Some will argue that he's great or even elite. Running back. Oregon has upgraded there in terms of depth. In terms of starter, I don't know. I think Jordan James would be the best starter in this running back room right now. Penn State returned both of their starters, so in theory they've upgraded more than Oregon has, and they also returned all their depth pieces. Receiver, Oregon in terms of wide receiver 1 upgraded, but they downgraded in depth, so it's a push, probably. Could even be worse. Penn State unanimously is better. O-line and D-line, Penn State upgraded at. Interior O-line, I would say Oregon upgraded at, bringing in Pregnan, returning Iapani Lololu. Tackle, we have yet to see. I'd say the early returns indicate it's probably a downgrade there. They've upgraded at D-end by returning both of their starters, Oregon has. I would argue Penn State across the entire defensive line has upgraded, or at least at D-end they've made a push. No one's Abdul Carter in pass rush, but Deniden Sutton is probably a better run stopper D-end. A little bit bigger, more of a true D-end, whereas Carter's more of an edge outside linebacker. And Chaz Coleman looks like he could fulfill that edge outside linebacker look. Linebacker. Oregon is probably athletically better there as most positions, but in theory, Penn State did more to bolster that group. At DB, I think both upgraded, and in theory, due to the early returns, Penn State's upgraded at special teams as well. So preseason research and priors and theory, and get this, even Vegas and the sports books and Jersey and their national title odds, which still have Penn State ahead of Oregon there, and have Penn State favored by 3.5 points, even though so many people are picking Oregon. The public's most bet line is Oregon plus 3.5. Despite all those things right now that are being talked about, Penn State preseason, much better than Oregon in terms of the roster additions, the returning starters, the coaching staff upgrades. That was nearly a consensus opinion, and one that I agreed with. The books have not moved off of that. The books have gotten higher on Oregon because they like what they see in the metrics. They have not moved an inch off Penn State, though. So I would be very careful in saying that we know Oregon's the better team. We do not. Oregon has shown against Oklahoma State what they are when they're angry, when they're mad, when they want to humiliate you. We have not seen that from Penn State yet. We have not seen an angry Penn State. And believe me, you may see that this Saturday. In fact, you will see it. You will see it if they have any potential to be angry at all. That's an opinion. It's not a fact. It's just something I wanted to add. Finally, look at the coaching and contextual edges in this game. I haven't changed camera angles because I want to be looking at all of you or in your direction for most of this video, because I think this is so important. So important. I'm not as confident in this as I was in picking Indiana to blow out Illinois, and I don't think this will be a blowout, but I'm very confident in believing Penn State will win. They are the better roster right now. They are the better team. They have matchup advantages over Oregon that Oregon does not over them. They have the best coordinator on the field. Oregon is the worst. They don't have to travel, and they have a bye week. Their starters are more rested. Their stadium is an intimidating environment, and they're older, probably wiser. They don't have to face a bunch of angry, drunk, mad Penn State fans. They don't have to do that. And if they did, they'd be better equipped for it. They've played in the horseshoe. They've played in the horseshoe. They have. They've played, many of these players have actually played in the Big House. The Big House isn't as loud as the shoe, or not even close to Autzen, but they've played in these games. They've made the trip out to USC in a very close, painful game. Death by 1,000 paper cuts type game. They've played in these games. Much of this Oregon roster has not. So how can you, and I could be wrong. If I'm wrong again, I will eat my words. I've already said in the comment section, if Oregon wins this game, I will then be picking them to win the national title, especially if they win by double digits, as some have implied. How can you abandon the coaching edge for coordinators, the travel, the environment, the fact that Oregon, a lot of their best offensive players, Dante Moore, Decorian Moore, Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, Emmanuel Pregnon even. How can you ignore that they have never played in an environment like this? They've never had the combo of the travel, the environment, and the trip. And also ignore that Penn State's roster preseason was viewed as unanimously better. They had more projected first-round picks. In some mock drafts, they still do have more projected first-round picks. How can you ignore all of that and throw the baby out with the bathwater because Aller's a bit inconsistent, because Penn State is not dominating in efficiency metrics? How can you throw that all away when, given those things I just told you, they're not letting him throw downfield, they're not letting him run, they are still running the ball extremely well, and the early returns for Penn State's defense suggest their defense is way better than it was last year, in the same way that the early returns for Oregon say their team overall is way better? How can you ignore all the things here that go Penn State's way? all of there's a mountain of things here that go Penn State's way. There are some things that go Oregon's way, but not nearly the same quantity. And I would argue to a certain degree, not even the same quality of reasons. Oh, Dante Moore's the better quarterback. Look, if Oregon can't stop Penn State from running 5-6 yards per carry, that doesn't matter here. And you know why it doesn't matter? Because Dante Moore isn't going to go into Beaver Stadium and be 35 of 40 for 500 yards. That will never happen. Heck, if that happens, you know what I'll do? If someone, the first person in the comment section below to say that will happen, I will give you $50. If you tell me that will happen and it does and I'm wrong, I will give you $50. Straight up, if that happens. Everyone's talking about quarterback, blue chip ratio, and sort of ignoring everything else. And that irritates me so much. We saw Carson Beck in Georgia lose to Jalen Milroe. We've seen C.J. Stroud at Ohio State never beat Michigan. We saw Will Howard lose to a collection of homeless people last year in Michigan, and nearly the same thing with that 6-6 Nebraska team. And all of those teams that I just brought up, outside of maybe that 2022 Michigan team, are worse teams than this Penn State team is, even factoring in some of the early returns. Look at what Michigan did in 2023. They beat their early season opponents by only 17, 24 points on an average basis. Look what Ohio State did last year against Nebraska when they were clearly load managing for that Penn State game and were looking ahead. Look at what they did against, Akron or Marshall, where they didn't cover the spread against Marshall and they looked incredibly sloppy in the first half against Akron. Look at what Alabama did in 2018. I know they didn't win it all, but that was still a really good team. They were tied at the half with the Citadel. You gotta not overreact. Don't be so week to week. And I'm worried that's what the public has done here. And I've probably overstayed my welcome, made too long of this video. I've taked this several times, but I'm more satisfied with this take than any of the others. I'm pleading all of you. I'm pleading with you. Do not fall for this. Don't do it. Oregon can lose this game and still win it all. They can. And if they somehow win this game, that says a whole lot about them in a way that I don't think most people who are picking Oregon will quantify. If Oregon comes in here and dominates, they are as close to a lock to winning the national title as a lot of the recent teams are. Yeah, they look good in efficiency metrics. Yes, they have a lot of talented players. Yes, Dan Lanning's a great coach. But so much goes Penn State here. And for whatever reason, it's not being talked about a lot. And I feel as if Oregon is being talked about as if they're the shiny new object, and we like them because of quarterback, and not many other reasons. And I really don't like that. I don't like it for Oregon either, from the standpoint of what will happen to what will the reaction be to Dante Moore if he goes in and is 15 of 27 for 180 yards and a touchdown and a pick. For all we know, for his first road start as a Duck, that could be a pretty good stat line against that defense in that environment. But would people immediately sell their stock on him because of that? Would people immediately write off Oregon as a title contender if they lose here based on how they're talking about them? Penn State is not getting the credit they deserve for what they bring back, the coaching changes they've made, the upgrades they made to their roster, and the fact that it is impressive to beat teams by 40, 50 points while playing your C game. They're not being given enough credit. And Oregon here is not being given any margin of error. Most people are analyzing this game from the lens that Oregon will play its A game, as it seemingly has for much of this year, and that A game is good enough to crush Penn State. even if Penn State plays their A game, Oregon's A game is good enough to beat Penn State's A game, even with the adversity of the travel, and that Oregon's A game is assumed to be better than Penn State's. And I just don't know if that's correct, and I don't think it is.